The illusion of pure giving. We've all seen it. A billionaire walks onto a stage, announces a massive donation, and the audience erupts in applause. The headlines read, "Generous, selfless, game changer." Social media lights up. Comment sections overflow with gratitude and admiration. But stop. Have you ever asked, where exactly did that money go? What changed after the donation? And why does the giver always seem to walk away with more fame, more power, more influence than before? We grow up believing that charity is sacred, that giving is good, that generosity is beyond question. But what if I told you this belief is exactly what makes the system so powerful? Because if no one dares to question something that looks pure, then anything, even manipulation, even control, can hide behind it. This isn't a story about hating generosity. It's about seeing the full picture, the parts no one talks about, the quiet truths that hide behind loud applause, and the uncomfortable question, what if giving has become the most beautiful disguise for control? In this video, we'll follow the money, we'll trace the influence, we'll uncover the dark mirror behind the shiny smile of philanthropy. And once you see it, you may never clap for a donation the same way again. The evolution of charity, from compassion to corporation. Charity didn't begin in skyscrapers. It began in silence. A neighbor offering a warm meal to someone who had none. A village coming together to rebuild a house after a storm. A stranger dropping a coin in an open hand without needing a receipt, a press release, or a standing ovation. In its purest form, charity was human. It wasn't organized, it wasn't structured, it certainly wasn't profitable. But over time, something changed. As money grew, so did the appetite to shape the world with it. And soon, giving was no longer a simple act of kindness, it became a strategy. The church was among the first institutions to formalize charity. Tithes, alms, offerings, all collected in the name of compassion. But even then, there was a line between serving the people and protecting power. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the Industrial Revolution birthed a new kind of giver, the philanthro-capitalist. Men who built empires, often through ruthless means, turned to charity not just to clean their conscience, but to cement their legacy. Take Andrew Carnegie, one of the wealthiest men in history. He preached the gospel of wealth, a belief that the rich were obligated to give back. But on whose terms? He donated libraries, schools, and cultural centers, yet resisted workers' rights and violently crushed strikes. He gave books, but denied better wages. Carnegie's model became the blueprint. Make money by any means, give just enough to be admired, and shape society in your image. Today, this model has evolved into something far more sophisticated. No longer just individual gifts, but massive foundations, global NGOs, and corporate philanthropy arms with boardrooms, marketing teams, and legal departments. These aren't random acts of kindness. They're calculated ecosystems, and they play by the rules of business, not empathy. They measure impact like profit. They optimize giving for visibility. They use charity not just to help, but to brand, influence, and protect. The language has changed too. It's not helping the poor anymore. It's creating sustainable impact solutions. It's leveraging capital for social good. It's scaling benevolence. Make no mistake, this is still charity, but it wears a suit now. It files taxes differently, and it answers not to the heart, but to the balance sheet. So when we hear that a billion-dollar corporation is giving back, we should ask, what did it take first? And what is it really buying with that generosity? Philanthropy as PR, the art of image laundering. Let's be honest. When a billionaire donates a stadium full of money, they're not just helping people. They're helping themselves. Because in today's world, philanthropy is the best public relations strategy money can buy. It doesn't matter if your company pollutes rivers, underpays workers, or manipulates markets. Donate to a hospital wing, sponsor a scholarship, launch a give back campaign. Suddenly, you're not the villain anymore. You're a visionary, a humanitarian, a saint in a suit. We call this image laundering, the art of using generosity to wash away controversy, rebuild reputation, and reset public memory. The worse the headlines, the louder the donation. You'll see it every time. A tech giant gets exposed for privacy violations and announces a $50 million education grant. A pharmaceutical company faces lawsuits over price gouging and funds healthcare for all initiatives. A celebrity is caught in scandal and launches a foundation to raise awareness. The timing is never accidental. The generosity is never unconditional. It's strategic, targeted, and marketed to perfection. Why fight bad press when you can bury it in benevolence? But it doesn't stop there. Image laundering through charity is also tax deductible. That's right, not only do you look good, you pay less for it. In some cases, you might even profit from it. Here's how it works. A billionaire creates a foundation in their name. They donate their own company stock to the foundation. They get a massive tax break immediately. The foundation then uses that stock to fund initiatives that align with the donor's personal interests. The media celebrates the act without looking deeper. Meanwhile, the donor keeps control over the money, over the narrative, over the brand. This isn't charity. It's a closed loop of power dressed up as generosity. It's the reason why some of the world's most generous people also happen to be among the most controversial. And yet, their reputations remain spotless because they don't just buy good press, they donate it. So the next time you see a high-profile act of giving, ask yourself, is this about the people or is this about the person giving? Because sometimes the donation is the loudest silence money can make. Tax havens in disguise. How donations protect wealth. It sounds noble. I'm giving away half my fortune to charity. But here's what they don't say. They're not giving it away. They're moving it. And often, they're moving it somewhere untouchable, untaxed, and under their control. Let's break it down. In most countries, especially the US, charitable donations are tax deductible. That means when a billionaire donates $100 million to a private foundation, they don't just lose $100 million. They often save tens of millions on taxes, sometimes more. Here's how the play works. Create a private foundation, usually named after yourself. Transfer stock or assets to that foundation. get a massive tax deduction, even though the money never left your world. Retain control over how the foundation invests, spends, and operates. Grow your influence while your money grows in a tax-advantaged account. The money doesn't go to random strangers. It stays in a pool, one you still direct. It's like moving your wealth from your right hand to your left. Only now the government can't tax it, and the public can't question it. This is not a loophole. It's the system working exactly as it was designed. Take the Donor-Advised Fund, or DAF, a financial vehicle that lets the rich deposit money, get an immediate tax write-off, but with no requirement to spend that money on any actual charity. Not now, not ever. Some DAFs sit for years, untouched. Meanwhile, the donor enjoys the tax perks up front, with no impact yet delivered. This isn't generosity. This is tax optimization masquerading as kindness. And it gets worse. Many of these foundations invest their charitable capital in the stock market, real estate, and private ventures, growing their wealth while claiming the moral high ground. In other words, I donated my fortune to a foundation that I still control, that makes investments I profit from, and pays little to no tax, while the public praises me for giving it all away. Magic? No, it's math. Now imagine this at scale. Thousands of ultra-wealthy families, billions moved into foundations, trillions sheltered from taxation, all while schools, hospitals, and public services, the ones not funded by foundations, are starved of government support. Because if the rich don't pay taxes, guess who does? Everyone else. So the next time someone says they gave it all away, ask, did they? Or did they just move it into a safer vault with better optics? Controlling the narrative. Influence through education and media. Let's say you had billions of dollars. You've already secured your wealth. Now, what would you buy next? For the ultra-rich, the answer is simple. The story. The way the world sees the world. And what better way to control the story than to fund the institutions that write it? That's where education and media come in. And that's where charity turns into a megaphone of influence. Think about it. An powerful foundation donates $200 million to a major university. In return, they get naming rights to buildings, programs, and even entire departments. They fund research, but only the kind that aligns with their interests. They endow professorships filled with voices that subtly reinforce their worldview. This isn't conspiracy, it's strategy. You shape what the next generation learns, and you shape how they think. It's why certain economic theories dominate the classroom, why discussions about inequality often avoid naming the true power holders, why philanthropy is taught as a force for good, never a tool for control. The goal isn't always to spread propaganda. Sometimes it's much more subtle. Tilt the curriculum just enough. Set the parameters of acceptable debate. Fund voices that sound objective but echo the same ideology. And then there's the media. When billionaires donate to journalism schools, public broadcasters, and nonprofit newsrooms, it's framed as a gift to democracy. But influence doesn't need censorship to work. All it needs is direction. A grant here, a fellowship there. Suddenly, coverage shifts. Certain topics get more airtime. Others slowly fade. It's not about telling lies. It's about choosing which truths get told loudest and which ones stay buried. Case in point. A foundation funds climate journalism, but also holds stock in energy companies. Another champions global health reporting while profiting from medical patents. A tech billionaire funds digital ethics research after facing privacy scandals. See the pattern? When you fund the storytellers, you don't need to write the script. You just own the stage. And because it's done under the banner of generosity, no one questions the puppeteer behind the curtain. So, the next time you see a headline that glorifies a generous donor, a lecture backed by a prestigious endowment, or a university center made possible by a famous foundation, ask yourself, are we learning or are we being led? The business of relief, profiting from poverty. Poverty is painful, but to some, poverty is also profitable. Disasters strike, wars erupt, famine spreads, and within hours, the machinery of aid kicks in. Planes filled with supplies, tents with logos, donation links, camera crews. From the outside, it looks like hope, but behind the curtain, it's often a business, a very big, very lucrative business. Let's look at how it works. A major charity gets millions in donations after a crisis, but it doesn't manufacture food, medicine, or tents. So what does it do? It contracts private companies to provide them. Many of those companies are, wait for it, owned by the same donors who fund the charity. In other words, the charity collects your money, then sends it to vendors they're tied to, at rates they control, to deliver help that often arrives too late or never at all. It's not just inefficient, it's engineered dependency. Each year, billions are poured into the relief economy, but little of it goes to solving root causes. Why? Because solving poverty would mean ending the business model. If people didn't need saving, the saviors would go out of work. It's the dark incentive no one talks about. Perpetual suffering keeps the lights on. That's why aid efforts often repeat the same cycle. Rush in during crisis, provide just enough to survive, take the photo, leave, come back next year. If a region actually recovers, aid dries up, budgets shrink, charities lose relevance. No one wants that, especially the executives with six-figure salaries. And yes, that's real. Many charity CEOs earn more than government ministers. Some live in luxury while asking the public to help the poor. What's worse? Some crises are exploited intentionally. Donations raised for earthquake victims get redirected to general funds. Emergency tents go unused, sold later at profit. Charity auctions fund admin costs, not the victims. It's not just mismanagement, it's a model that rewards appearance over impact. The optics of aid matter more than the outcome. And as long as people believe they're helping, few stop to ask, is this helping at all? So next time you give, ask more than just who you're helping. Ask, who's getting paid? Who's staying poor? And who profits if things never get better? Because sometimes relief is just another word for revenue. Political leverage. How giving buys power. Imagine this. You can't legally bribe a politician, but you can donate to their favorite cause. You can fund a think tank. You can sponsor a public policy research grant. You can bankroll a lobbying group that just happens to align with your business goals. And no one calls it corruption. They call it charity. This is how modern philanthropy buys invisible influence. Not through brown envelopes, but through foundation grants, advisory councils, and tax-free funding. Because when you give the money outside the system, you control the rules within the system. Let's be blunt. Policy is shaped by those who pay for the conversation. And today, that means the ultra-wealthy and their foundations. Here's how the strategy unfolds. A billionaire identifies an issue they care about, or one that affects their business. They fund non-partisan organizations that produce studies, data, and narratives to influence that issue. Those organizations host conferences, white papers, and panels attended by lawmakers. The media picks up the research. Politicians quote it. Soon the idea becomes law, and the law favors the giver. All under the banner of public good. Take education reform. In multiple countries, wealthy foundations have heavily influenced school policy by funding pilot programs, testing models, and supporting innovation. But those innovations often include privatization, standardized testing, and digital platforms, things that generate profit for the very people funding them. The result? Laws passed under the illusion of progress, but designed by those who never went to the schools they're changing. In public health, similar patterns emerge. A foundation donates to a global vaccine initiative, then advises governments on distribution, pricing, and patents, while holding intellectual property stakes in the very pharmaceuticals being pushed. What starts as charity becomes leverage, silent, legal, and permanent. Even democracy itself isn't immune. When the same billionaires who fund political campaigns also fund voter outreach, polling firms, or social justice grants, lines blur. And the question becomes, are they serving democracy, or are they curating it? Because when one person's money can shape what laws get written, what problems get solved, and who gets heard, then we're no longer living in a democracy. We're living in a donationocracy. And the scariest part? The donors aren't elected. They face no term limits, no public oversight, no accountability, just applause. So the next time you see a billionaire speak about social impact, ask yourself, what are they really buying? And how much of your future is part of the deal? The dependency trap, keeping the poor dependent. We've been told that charity empowers the poor, but what if it actually chains them? What if the very system built to help is designed to make sure they always need help again? This is the hidden engine of dependency, a cycle so deeply embedded in modern charity that breaking free from it almost feels ungrateful. Here's how it works. A community is struggling, so a charity arrives. They provide food, clothing, medicine. They host workshops, build schools, dig wells. It seems noble. It looks effective, and people are thankful. But then they leave. And when the food runs out, when the school breaks down, when the well stops working, the community waits, because they were never taught how to maintain it. They never owned the tools. They never had a say in the design. They were recipients, not partners. The charity returns, brings more help, takes more photos, and the cycle begins again. Help followed by helplessness. And that's the trap. When aid replaces agency, it builds dependency. And dependency is a quiet form of control. Why teach someone to farm when giving rice keeps them grateful? Why invest in local leadership when outside experts make better headlines? Why solve the root when symptoms are easier to manage and cheaper to brand? This is why so many aid programs measure success in volume, not in exit. How many mouths fed, not how many mouths now feed themselves. How many schools built, not how many graduates changed their future. How much was donated, not how much is still needed. Because true empowerment is messy. It takes time. It threatens the helper's relevance. It says, we don't need you anymore. But for many charities, that's the nightmare. Because their survival depends on the persistence of suffering. So instead of uprooting the system, they become part of it. They manage poverty instead of ending it. And all the while, they're praised, celebrated, funded more, while the poor remain poor. Different banner, same chains. So the next time someone says, we're here to help, ask, for how long? And on whose terms? Because real help means eventually walking away and leaving no one behind. The Saint Complex, society's obsession with the giver. We love a good giver. We build statues for them, name hospitals after them, put their faces on magazine covers, call them visionaries, heroes, the moral compass of our age. And the more they give, the more we forgive. This is what we call the Saint Complex, society's collective obsession with glorifying the act of giving while ignoring everything else about the giver. We don't ask how they earn their money. We don't question why they're giving it. We just worship the gesture because it feels good to believe in good people. But here's the problem. When the giver becomes sacred, the system becomes untouchable. We lose the ability to criticize, to question, to investigate, because it feels wrong to doubt someone doing so much good. So the billionaire who laid off thousands gets praised for donating laptops to schools. The mogul who polluted rivers gets honored for building clean water wells in another country. The executive who blocked workers' health care wins awards for funding cancer research. This isn't accountability, it's absolution by donation. It turns public praise into a shield, one so strong that even injustice can hide behind it. And here's where it gets more dangerous. When we obsess over the giver, we shift the spotlight away from the people in need. Instead of asking, why do so many people need help in the first place? We ask, isn't it amazing that he helped them? We applaud the Savior, but ignore the suffering that made salvation necessary. It's a psychological trick. The more dramatic the giving, the more heroic the giver seems, and the less likely we are to notice the systemic failure underneath. Even worse, sometimes the giver caused that failure. But no one looks back far enough to connect the dots, because we're too busy clapping. The truth is, real generosity doesn't demand worship. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't market itself. But in today's world, we've blurred the line. We don't just admire generosity, we brand it. And in doing so, we've made it harder to tell the difference between a saint and a strategist. So the next time you see a golden name on a building, a headline praising the most generous man alive, or a viral video of a billionaire crying while handing out money, pause and ask, who are we really celebrating? And why do they need us to celebrate them at all? Case study, the Gates Foundation. When you think of modern philanthropy, one name rises above the rest, the Gates Foundation. With an endowment of over $50 billion, it's often hailed as the gold standard of giving back. Bill and Melinda Gates are praised as global saviors, tackling everything from poverty and disease to education and climate change. They're invited to conferences, they advise governments, they shape global health agendas. But behind the applause, what's really happening? Let's look closer. The Gates Foundation has invested billions into public health, particularly in vaccines. That sounds noble, but here's the twist. While promoting access to vaccines in poor countries, the foundation also holds stakes in the very pharmaceutical companies that manufacture them. In other words, they fund the distribution while profiting from the supply. It's a model critics call philanthrocapitalism, a hybrid of charity and business where doing good and making money are no longer separate. But that raises a question. Can you truly be objective about helping the world if helping the world also helps your bottom line? Let's take a real example. In the fight against polio, the Gates Foundation spent billions developing and distributing the oral polio vaccine, especially in Africa and South Asia. What the media didn't say loudly, in some rare cases, that same vaccine caused vaccine-derived polio outbreaks. These were not conspiracy theories. They were confirmed by the World Health Organization. And yet, the narrative remained simple. Gates saved millions. End of story. No deep examination, no accountability for unintended consequences, no space for dissenting voices, because criticizing a foundation that gives so much feels morally wrong. Now, let's move to education. The Gates Foundation heavily influenced U.S. school reform, pushing for standardized testing, teacher evaluations based on student scores, and the Common Core curriculum. After a decade and billions spent, results were mixed at best and disastrous at worst. Teachers burned out, students reduced to test scores, classrooms turned into data points. Eventually, even the foundation admitted it didn't work as intended. But by then, the damage was done, and the education landscape had already shifted, not by elected officials or communities, but by a private foundation with no democratic accountability. This is the danger of power wrapped in compassion. The Gates Foundation may have good intentions, but the scale of its influence in health, education, agriculture, and media raises serious questions. Who decides what problems get prioritized? Who benefits from the solutions? And what happens when private interests shape public futures? Because in the end, a foundation is not a government. It's not elected. It doesn't answer to the people. And yet, it wields power like one. So, while the world sees Bill Gates as a generous savior, we must also ask, when one man has the power to direct billions, influence nations, and shape how the world fights its biggest problems, is that charity or is that control? Case study: Big Pharma and health charity. At first glance, health charities seem untouchable. They raise money for cancer, for AIDS, for clean water, for maternal care. They run emotional ads with tearful children and heroic doctors. They promise cures, breakthroughs, and life-saving treatment. But behind the white coats and pink ribbons, there's another layer, one where charity and pharmaceutical profit go hand in hand. Let's start with a simple question. Who funds the biggest health charities in the world? Look closely, and you'll often find the same companies that make the drugs: Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, GSK, all household names and all frequent donors to global health nonprofits, medical NGOs, and disease awareness campaigns. Why? Because it's good business. A pharmaceutical company gives millions to a charity fighting, say, breast cancer. That charity then promotes early screening, testing, and access to treatment, all of which lead back to drugs sold by the same company. Now that might seem like a win-win, but here's where the illusion cracks. These same companies often lobby against drug price controls, block the release of generic versions, and fiercely guard their patents, even in poor countries. They give, but only as long as they keep getting more back. Take the example of HIV medication. For years, drug companies were accused of pricing antiretrovirals so high that millions in Africa couldn't afford them. Activists protested. People died waiting. Eventually, under pressure, pharma companies partnered with global charities to provide discounted or donated medicine. They were hailed as heroes. But in the background, they maintained control over supply chains, restricted local production, and ensured that the world remained dependent on their versions of the drugs. Charity became a PR shield, hiding the fact that lives were lost to corporate greed. Now let's look at the opioid crisis. In the US, some of the biggest health charities unknowingly partnered with, and in some cases accepted funding from, companies like Purdue Pharma, the creators of OxyContin. Purdue donated millions to pain management education, sponsored medical conferences, and supported chronic pain awareness. The result? A generation of doctors overprescribed addictive drugs, believing they were helping, backed by research and outreach paid for through charity. It took decades before the truth came out, and by then, hundreds of thousands were addicted, dead, or broken. And yet, even today, health charities continue to accept corporate money, often with zero transparency to the public. Who's funding the Cancer Walk? Who's behind that Awareness Month? Who wrote the educational materials in your hospital? Sometimes, it's the very companies whose products create more illness than they prevent. So what looks like generosity may actually be strategic giving to shape the narrative, control the research, influence policy, and ensure their name stays on the cure, not the cause. Because in a system where health is profit, the goal is never to eliminate disease, just to manage it, sell to it, and control the conversation around it. So the next time you donate for a cure, ask whose cure, at what price, and who gets to stay sick so someone else stays rich. Education reform or indoctrination? When a billionaire says, "I want to fix education," the world listens. Governments open doors, universities accept funding, media applauds the generosity. But here's the quiet question no one dares to ask. What does fix mean, and for whom? Because education isn't just about what you learn, it's about what you're taught to believe. And when the people funding your education also control your worldview, it stops being education and becomes indoctrination. Let's break it down. Many wealthy philanthropists fund school reform. They say schools are broken, teachers are inefficient, and systems need disruption. So they propose charter schools, standardized testing, private management, tech-driven learning, and corporate partnerships. All sounds innovative, all sounds efficient. But who defines success? Usually the donor. And what does success look like? Measurable results, market-ready graduates, scalable models, and centralized control. But not necessarily curiosity, critical thinking, or community power. Take the US, for example. Private foundations like Gates, Walton, and Broad have poured billions into reshaping public schools. They've pushed for data-driven systems, test-based teacher evaluations, and digital platforms. What happened? Teachers burned out. Creativity died. Schools became test factories, and communities lost control over how their children were taught, all in the name of philanthropy. Elsewhere, in low-income countries, major foundations fund entire national curriculums, but with strings attached. They influence what history is taught, what economic theories are promoted, which languages are prioritized, what success means in the global marketplace. They promise to lift children out of poverty, but often they're preparing them for a world where someone else is always in charge. That's not empowerment. That's soft colonization. And the most dangerous part? It's invisible. Parents see a new school. Politicians see better data. Students get laptops. But what they don't see is the ideology embedded in the code, the bias in the textbooks, the incentives behind the tests. We're not talking just about content. We're talking about values. What kind of citizen are we creating? Who gets to ask questions and who must obey? What dreams are allowed and which ones are quietly erased? Because when education is funded not for liberation, but for optimization, we don't raise thinkers, we raise workers, consumers, quiet followers of a world they had no part in shaping. So the next time someone says, "I'm donating to improve schools," ask, whose vision of improvement? Who writes the curriculum? And what future are we being trained for without consent? Because real education doesn't just teach you how to serve the system, it teaches you to question it. Disaster capitalism. Charity after crisis. A hurricane levels an island. A deadly earthquake reduces a city to rubble. A virus spreads across continents. And within hours, the world responds with a familiar rhythm. Breaking news, celebrity pleas, donation drives, hashtags, aid packages, and of course, charity. It feels like hope, but in the shadows, another machine is quietly powering on, one not fueled by compassion, but by opportunity. This is disaster capitalism, the exploitation of crisis for profit. And increasingly, charity plays a central role in it. Let's take a look at how it works. When a disaster strikes, charities flood in. They receive billions in donations. They make promises. They deploy volunteers, distribute supplies, and rebuild. Sort of. But then the fine print begins to show. Aid contracts are awarded to private firms, often from donor countries. Local workers are bypassed in favor of outside consultants. Temporary shelters become permanent dependency zones. Reconstruction is designed not to restore communities, but to reshape them in the image of those with money. Take Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. Over $13 billion in aid was pledged. Hundreds of charities mobilized. But more than a decade later, displaced families still live in tents. Infrastructure is unfinished. And most of the money never reached the people. Why? Because much of it was funneled through large NGOs, foreign contractors, and administrative overhead. Worse, land was acquired under the guise of rebuilding, only to be turned into luxury hotels, industrial zones, and tax havens. The crisis became a real estate opportunity, and charity became the perfect disguise. Or consider Nepal after the 2015 earthquake. International NGOs dominated recovery efforts, sidelining local organizations. Decisions about rebuilding, culture, and community structure were made in boardrooms thousands of miles away. Aid came, but with conditions. Western-style buildings replaced traditional homes. Foreign education systems replaced local knowledge. And the people were left with a haunting realization. Their tragedy had been monetized. This is the pattern. Disaster strikes, charity steps in, but instead of empowering the community, it opens the door for outside control. Land gets rezoned, public services are privatized, local businesses are pushed out by international partners. It's the perfect storm of grief and greed. And why does this happen? because in times of disaster, governments are weak, people are desperate, and oversight is almost non-existent. Charities, many with good intentions, become vehicles for foreign interests, not through bombs or bullets, but through donations. And those donations reshape economies, cultures, and futures, often in ways locals never consented to. So the next time you see a campaign that says, rebuild, restore, recover, ask, rebuild for whom? Restore what? Recover into whose hands? Because when the dust settles, sometimes the only thing that's truly saved is someone else's profit margin.
The NGO-Industrial Complex. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs. The name itself implies independence, neutrality, altruism. They don't work for governments, they don't chase profit. They're supposed to be the moral backbone of global aid. But what happens when the system designed to serve the people quietly starts to sustain itself instead? Welcome to the NGO-Industrial Complex, a sprawling global ecosystem of organizations that began with compassion but now often operates like a corporate empire. Let's take a closer look. Today, there are over 10 million NGOs worldwide. They employ millions of staff, manage trillions in funding, and influence policies across every continent. Some of the biggest NGOs have annual budgets larger than the GDP of small nations, and they operate with shocking little oversight. So what's the problem? It starts with a question. Who funds them? Many NGOs receive money from the very governments, corporations, and elite foundations they claim to hold accountable. Think about that. An environmental NGO is funded by oil-linked foundations. A health NGO receives grants from pharmaceutical giants. A human rights NGO partners with arms-producing nations, and yet they're expected to remain neutral? Here's what really happens. An NGO receives a grant with suggested focus areas. Their research, campaigns, and advocacy subtly align with donor interests. They publish findings, train local leaders, and influence policy, all under the brand of civil society. Meanwhile, their existence becomes dependent on continued funding. So what do they prioritize? Solutions that make them indispensable, not ones that put them out of business. This is where the NGO mission often mutates, from solving poverty to managing poverty, from empowering communities to representing them indefinitely, from challenging systems to becoming part of them. It's institutional self-preservation disguised as activism. And inside the structure, executive salaries that rival corporate CEOs, donor-driven strategy retreats in five-star hotels, PR departments bigger than program teams, and impact reports filled with metrics but lacking meaning. All while on the ground, local voices are marginalized, grassroots organizers are underfunded, and real change is replaced with campaigns, hashtags, and white papers. Many NGOs start with noble intent, but the system they're absorbed into, one of endless funding cycles, donor appeasement, and bureaucratic expansion, often pushes them into safe, shallow, and symbolic action. Worse yet, they can become gatekeepers. Want to receive aid? Go through the approved NGO. Want your issue to be heard? Only if it fits their narrative. Want funding for local solutions? Too risky, too radical, too unscalable. So what was meant to decentralize power ends up centralizing influence in the hands of elite-funded institutions wearing grassroots masks. It's not that NGOs are inherently bad, it's that the system rewards compliance over courage. And over time, even good people,
Learn to choose relevance over resistance. So the next time you hear the phrase, NGOs are on the ground making a difference, ask, whose ground? Whose agenda? And who's really benefiting? The people or the structure built around helping them? Because when charity becomes industry, impact becomes secondary to survival.
The psychology of giving. How we're tricked. You see a child on screen. Thin arms, sunken eyes. A tear rolls down their cheek. A soft voice whispers, "For just $1 a day, you can change their life." Your heart aches. Your hand reaches for your wallet. That's not weakness. That's being human. But what if that very instinct, your empathy, is exactly what's being manipulated? Welcome to the psychology of giving, where emotion becomes currency and your compassion is a tool in someone else's strategy. Let's break it down. We are wired to respond to faces, not numbers. Show people a statistic. 800 million people go hungry every day, and most will scroll past. But show one malnourished child, and donations surge. This is called the identifiable victim effect. We don't give to causes, we give to stories. And charity campaigns know this. They don't just ask for help, they craft pain. Carefully selected images, soft music, scripted testimonies, and calls to action timed with emotional peaks. This isn't aid, it's emotional engineering. We feel guilty if we don't give, ashamed if we question the narrative, and proud if we share the post, even if we have no idea where the money goes. Because the act of giving makes us feel good, feel moral, feel better about the world and about ourselves. That's not inherently wrong, but it makes us vulnerable to illusion. Here's how the trick works. You're shown a crisis, framed in urgency. You're given a simple solution, a small donation. You act, you feel relief, but you're never shown the system that caused the crisis. So the cycle repeats, and your attention becomes the product. Charities aren't just collecting money, they're collecting emotional capital. Because when you feel good giving, you're less likely to ask, where exactly is my donation going? How much reaches the people? What power structures am I reinforcing? Even worse, many campaigns subtly centered the giver, not the receiver. It's about your kindness, your impact, your change-making power. The people in need become props in a performance, silent, passive, grateful. This reinforces a dangerous dynamic, the giver as savior, the receiver as forever dependent. It may feel like generosity, but psychologically, it elevates egos more than communities. Now ask yourself, why do some charities spend more on marketing than on aid? Why do they never show you stories of long-term empowerment, only endless need? Why are we trained to respond with emotion, but not with inquiry? Because the moment you start thinking critically, the illusion breaks. You begin to see that many solutions are designed not to solve, but to soothe. Not to end suffering, but to package it. So the next time your heartstrings are pulled, pause and ask, is this helping them or just helping me feel like I helped? Because real compassion isn't a moment of emotion. It's the courage to look deeper and to act even when it no longer feels good. Real versus performative altruism. In a world obsessed with appearances,
Even kindness has become a performance. We don't just help people, we film it. We don't just give, we announce it. We don't just care, we brand our care. This is the rise of performative altruism, when acts of generosity are done not to uplift others, but to elevate the giver's image. You've seen it before. Influencers handing food to homeless people with cameras rolling. CEOs announcing donations during scandals like a press conference apology. Companies turning charity into marketing like buy one, we give one. Celebrities crying on stage during fundraisers, then promoting their next product in the same breath. It looks like compassion. It smells like impact. But look closer, and you'll see it's a stage, not a sacrifice. So what's the difference between real and performative altruism? Let's break it down. 1. Real altruism is quiet. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't chase applause. It often happens without anyone knowing, because the goal is the help, not the recognition. Performative altruism, on the other hand, is loud. It's choreographed. It's designed for maximum visibility, not maximum impact. 2. Real altruism empowers. It asks, how can I make myself unnecessary? It aims to create independence, dignity, and long-term change. Performative altruism creates dependency. It asks, how can I stay in the spotlight while they stay in need? It often traps recipients in narratives of helplessness, so the giver always looks heroic. 3. Real altruism is uncomfortable. It confronts systems. It questions privilege. It sometimes means giving up power, not just money. Performative altruism is safe. It avoids structural critique. It lets the giver remain on the pedestal, unchallenged, adored, untouchable. Let's be clear, visibility isn't inherently wrong. Sometimes public acts of kindness inspire others. Sometimes they raise awareness, spark dialogue, mobilize resources. But the problem begins when the story becomes more about the giver than the gift, when charity turns into a PR stunt, when doing good becomes a status symbol. That's not altruism. That's self-branding. It creates a dangerous culture where people measure their worth by how publicly generous they are, where causes are chosen for virality, not urgency, where suffering becomes content and compassion becomes a currency for fame. Even worse, it drowns out real efforts happening quietly behind the scenes. Grassroots organizers, community leaders, everyday people making change without a camera, a logo, or a press release. So how do we know what's real? We ask different questions. Does this act redistribute power or just attention? Is it centered on the people being helped or on the person helping? Would they still do it if no one ever knew? Because true altruism doesn't need a spotlight. It shines in what it leaves behind, not in how brightly it lights up the moment. So the next time you see a grand gesture of giving, don't just admire the action. Ask, is this real? Or is this a role played by someone who knows exactly where the camera is? The role of social media, virtue signaling in the digital age. There was a time when charity happened in quiet corners, no headlines, no filters, no followers. But in the age of social media, giving has become a performance art. We now live in a world where A donation isn't complete until it's shared. Helping someone means tagging them. Compassion must be aesthetic, and generosity needs to go viral. This is the era of virtue signaling, where the appearance of doing good often matters more than the impact of it. Let's break it down. A person films themselves handing out blankets to the homeless. Thousands like the post. The caption says, "More love, less judgment." But what was really accomplished? Did the person on the street gain shelter, or were they used as a prop in someone else's personal brand? The line between empathy and exploitation is thinner than ever, because social media turns everything into content, even pain, even poverty, even kindness. And platforms reward visibility, not integrity. The algorithm doesn't care about nuance. It favors what's emotional, dramatic, and shareable. So we get tearful stories with soft music overlays, before and after transformations with inspirational quotes, hashtag campaigns that trend for 24 hours, then vanish, empty gestures wrapped in beautiful packaging. This isn't always intentional. Many people genuinely want to help, but the system incentivizes performance over purpose. If you donate quietly, no one sees. If you volunteer without posting it, it didn't happen. If you fund a project but don't hashtag it, you're not using your platform. Social pressure replaces moral compass. And over time, charity becomes less about helping the vulnerable and more about signaling that you're the kind of person who helps. This creates dangerous distortions. Causes get ranked by how trendy they are, not how urgent. Crises in photogenic places get more attention than silent emergencies. Good becomes a performance metric, not a value system. Worse yet, this culture silences critique. Because if someone posts a video of their donation and you question it, you're seen as a hater. You're attacking generosity. You're bringing negativity into something positive. So bad charity gets protected by the very performance of being good. And real impact gets lost beneath a pile of likes, shares, and "you're such an angel" comments. So what do? We shift the lens. Instead of asking who's being generous, we ask who's being served. Instead of admiring the post, we examine the structure. Who benefits? What changes? Will this still matter a week from now? Because true compassion doesn't require a camera. It requires courage, consistency, and accountability. So the next time you see charity go viral, pause before you like and ask, is this kindness or is this content? The cost of speaking up. Whistleblowers and silenced critics. Every illusion has its cracks, and sometimes someone dares to point them out. A staff member notices inflated budgets. A local volunteer sees aid being redirected. A journalist uncovers cozy deals between charities and corporations. They speak up, expecting reform. Instead, they face retaliation. Welcome to the hidden cost of exposing the truth. To criticize charity is to risk being seen as cruel. Because charity is cloaked in virtue. And when something is seen as pure, any attempt to question it feels like heresy. But the truth is, Many whistleblowers inside the charity world have tried to raise red flags and been punished for it. They've lost jobs, been blacklisted from entire sectors, had their reputations destroyed, branded as disruptive, ungrateful, or disloyal. Why? Because in an industry built on trust, truth is bad for business. Let's look at a few patterns. A former aid worker reveals that only a fraction of donations reach communities. The charity responds not by addressing the claim, but by launching a PR campaign about misinformation. An insider exposes exploitative conditions within a humanitarian organization. They're accused of breaking confidentiality, and their career ends quietly. A small local NGO speaks out about how big international charities dominate funding and are told to stay in their lane. The message is clear: silence is rewarded, dissent is punished. And the media? Often reluctant to dig too deep, because many outlets receive funding from the very foundations they'd need to investigate. Charity becomes an untouchable topic, not because it's flawless, but because it's too delicate to question. Even the public plays a role. When someone critiques a large, well-known charity, they're often met with, "At least they're doing something. Why attack the people who are trying to help? If you care so much, why don't you do it better?" The result? Bad practices continue. Power remains unchecked, and those who could make a difference walk away in silence, because calling out corruption in a corporation earns you credibility, but calling it out in a charity, that makes you the villain. This creates a dangerous environment where stories are curated, questions are discouraged, and those with the most insight are kept in fear. And when that happens, the people who suffer most aren't the donors. They're the communities who never get real help, just glossy reports and good intentions. So what can we learn? That accountability and compassion are not enemies. Real generosity welcomes feedback. Real charity invites scrutiny. Because if your impact is honest, you shouldn't fear questions. You should fear silence. So the next time someone dares to ask, "Where did the money go?" don't silence them. Stand with them. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is question what's hiding behind a smile.
What real help looks like beyond the charity system. After everything we've uncovered, the manipulation, the image laundering, the performance of generosity, it's easy to feel hopeless. Like every act of giving is fake. Like every donor has an agenda. Like real compassion is dead. But here's the truth. Real help still exists. It's just not always where the cameras are. You won't see it trending. You won't find it at black tie fundraisers. It rarely comes with a logo or a PR firm. Because real help isn't loud. It's local. It's slow. It's rooted in relationship, not reputation. Let's redefine what real help looks like. Number 1. It empowers, not rescues. Real help doesn't swoop in with pre-made solutions. It listens first. It asks questions. It puts tools in people's hands, then steps back. True aid says, "You know your needs better than we do. How can we support you to lead?" Number 2, it shifts power, not just resources. Giving money is easy. Giving up control, much harder. But real help means giving communities the ability to decide how funds are used and who uses them. It means decentralizing charity, letting local organizations lead, trusting people with their own futures. Number 3, it builds systems, not spotlights.
Handing out meals is important, but building a food cooperative that feeds generations, that's transformation. Donating laptops helps a school. Training teachers, updating curriculum, and sustaining local education helps a nation. Real help thinks long-term. It doesn't ask, how many people did we serve this month? It asks, how many people won't need us next year? Number 4, it includes instead of speaking for. Too many charities give voice to the voiceless, but the truth is, they've always had a voice. They just never had the mic. Real help isn't about being their voice, it's about stepping aside so they can speak and lead for themselves. And number 5, it challenges the system, not just softens the pain. Charity often works like a bandage, but real change asks, why is the wound still open? That's the hard part. It means confronting inequality, racism, colonization, and economic exploitation. It means calling out the very systems that charities sometimes protect. And yes, that makes people uncomfortable. But comfort has never been the birthplace of justice. So what does this look like in practice? Community land trusts, worker-owned cooperatives, mutual aid networks, indigenous-led climate projects, participatory budgeting, feminist funds with no strings attached, and people quietly and consistently showing up, not for credit, but for change. These don't fit the traditional charity model. They don't always come with tax deductions or gala dinners, but they are powerful, messy, and human, because they are not built on saviorism, they're built on solidarity. So the next time you want to help, don't ask, how can I save them? Ask, who's already doing the work, and how can I stand beside them? Because the most radical form of giving isn't money, it's trust. Seeing through the mask. Charity wears a beautiful mask. It smiles gently. It speaks in soft tones. It tells us the world can be healed with kindness if we just give enough. And we want to believe it, because we want to believe in goodness, in solutions, in heroes. But now you've seen what lies beneath. You've seen how charity, in its modern form, has been hijacked, used to protect wealth, not dismantle inequality, used to influence politics, not empower the people, used to soothe guilt, not solve injustice, used to create dependency, not liberation. You've seen how generosity became marketing, how empathy became entertainment, how giving became a tool not to lift people up, but to keep power firmly in place. So where does that leave us? Not in despair, but in awareness. Because seeing the illusion isn't the end. It's the beginning of something more honest, more radical, and more human. It's the moment we stop mistaking noise for impact. The moment we stop applauding every donation as inherently good. The moment we realize real change doesn't come from saviors, it comes from solidarity. That doesn't mean we stop giving. It means we give differently. We question where our money goes. We support local and grassroots efforts. We fund empowerment, not dependency. We center the people being helped, not the ones helping. We stop looking up to heroes and start standing beside humans. And when we do that, we stop feeding the illusion. We start building something real. So the next time you see a press release, a viral video, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, pause. Look beyond the smile. Look beyond the applause and ask, who benefits? Who decides? And who still waits for justice while the world celebrates generosity? because compassion without consciousness is just another mask. And the future we need will not be built on charity. It will be built on truth.
The savior economy, when helping becomes a business model. What if saving the world became the most profitable business of all? Welcome to the savior economy, a growing industry where helping isn't just noble, it's scalable, investable, and monetizable. Gone are the days when charity was just about giving. Today, it's a market with supply chains, portfolios, investment rounds, and shareholders, all dressed up in the language of impact. This is no longer about aid, it's about returns. Let's break it down. Have you heard of social impact investing? It's a model where wealthy individuals or institutions invest in projects that claim to create both social good and financial profit. Sounds ideal, right? But here's the trick. To make those returns attractive, the problems must remain profitable. You don't build a system that ends homelessness. You invest in one that manages it while delivering quarterly metrics. You don't eradicate hunger. You build an ecosystem of food innovation startups, NGOs, and delivery logistics that depend on the hungry staying hungry. Welcome to the loop of monetized suffering. 1. From donation to investment. Traditionally, charity was about giving with no expectation of return. Now, the elite want ROI on their kindness, so they fund schools but own the ed tech that runs the curriculum. They support water access but hold patents on filtration systems. Every solution has a revenue stream, and every act of compassion comes with an ownership stake. 2. The metrics of morality. In the savior economy, impact is measured like profit. How many users did your charity platform reach? What's the engagement rate on your mental health app? Did your clean water initiative scale 10x in Q3? Doing good is no longer the goal. Appearing efficient at doing good is. The result? Projects that are easy to track and report get the most funding, not necessarily the ones that truly change lives. Startups for struggle. Venture capital has entered the aid space. There are now incubators for social impact startups, businesses built around solving problems like poverty, refugee resettlement, and rural education. But when your startup's survival depends on people staying in crisis, how hard are you really working to end the crisis? The branding of benevolence. Corporations use the savior economy as a marketing funnel. Clothing brands that donate a pair of shoes for every sale. Banks that fund financial literacy after decades of predatory lending. Tech giants who build digital classrooms but harvest student data. The message? We care. The truth? They've simply figured out that compassion sells. And what gets lost in all this? People. Their stories, their agency, their right to be more than a KPI on someone's investor pitch deck. Because the savior economy doesn't ask, how do we solve injustice? It asks, how can we scale justice and take equity while we're at it? But some things shouldn't be scalable. Some things require listening, slowness, and sacrifice, not strategy decks and seed rounds. So the next time you see a startup reinventing charity, ask, is this help or is this harvest? Is this justice or is this just a new product in disguise? Because not every hand reaching out to help is reaching out for you. Sometimes it's reaching for your story to turn it into someone else's gain. Charity celebrities. How fame hijacks the cause. They walk through refugee camps with a camera crew,
They cry on stage at global summits. They hold starving children while dressed in couture. They say, "I'm using my platform to raise awareness." But what if sometimes the cause becomes the platform? Welcome to the world of charity celebrities, where fame wears the mask of compassion and suffering becomes a stepping stone to personal legacy. Let's be clear, not all celebrity involvement is performative. Some use their influence to elevate real grassroots efforts. Some give quietly. Some listen before they speak. But the system, as it stands, rewards performance over presence. And increasingly, charity has become a branding tool, not a moral compass. 1. The optics of empathy. A celebrity arrives in a war-torn region for 48 hours. They pose for photos. They release a black and white video. They give an emotional speech at a gala. By the time they leave, donations spike. Their social media explodes, and their image gets a golden halo. But the people? They're still there, still displaced, still waiting for the next visitor. Was it about them or about the person who came and left with more followers? 2. The savior narrative in the spotlight. Many celebrity charity efforts follow a predictable formula. Find a visibly poor, brown or black child. Be seen holding or hugging them. Speak about giving them hope, and frame yourself as the one who made a difference. This is the white savior complex, now with brand sponsorship. It reinforces the idea that people in crisis need to be rescued, not supported, respected, or empowered. It centers the helper, always. 3. When the cause becomes a costume. You've seen the award shows, charity wristbands on red carpets, impact fashion lines that donate 1%, benefit concerts where tickets cost more than what's raised. Suffering becomes a theme, compassion becomes aesthetic, and charity becomes a seasonal campaign. But when the lights go down, what actually changes? 4. Real activists get erased. In the noise of celebrity attention, local organizers, the ones who spent years doing real work, are often pushed to the sidelines. Their voices are ignored. Their complexity is simplified. Their struggle becomes a backdrop for a glamorous story. Because celebrity doesn't like nuance. It likes clear villains, clear heroes, and a neatly wrapped photo op. 5. The currency of caring. In today's attention economy, caring is capital. It boosts brand value, attracts sponsors, generates content, wins awards. And when the crisis fades, the celebrity moves on to the next cause, the next press tour, the next reinvention. But the people they helped, they remain, unchanged and often unheard. So how do we shift the culture? We stop confusing visibility with value. We uplift voices from within the community, not just the ones with blue check marks. We support actions, not appearances, and we demand depth over drama. Because the cause is not a stage, pain is not a prop, and being famous doesn't make you right. So the next time a celebrity cries for a country they just landed in, ask, is this about the crisis or about the camera? Is this for them or is this for us to feel better by watching? Because when charity becomes content, the ones who suffer become the setting. When good intentions harm, the unseen damage of bad charity. Isn't it better than nothing? That's the question defenders of failed charity efforts often ask. But here's the truth. Sometimes nothing is better than harm disguised as help. Because good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes. And in the world of global giving, well-meaning actions can leave behind scars deeper than the crisis itself. Let's explore how bad charity, even with the best intentions, can cause real damage. 1. Dumping, not developing. Imagine a Western nonprofit sends a shipping container of free clothes to a rural village in Africa. Sounds kind? Except local tailors now lose their income. Markets collapse. People become dependent on foreign goods, and the local economy withers under the weight of generosity. This isn't hypothetical. It's happened again and again in places like Kenya, Haiti, and Ghana. Free can be fatal when it undermines local capacity. 2. Rebuilding wrong. After natural disasters, charities often rush in to rebuild homes, but many bring outside contractors, imported materials, and Western-style designs. What's lost? Local architecture suited for the climate, cultural practices embedded in home layouts, jobs for local builders, community ownership. What's gained? A photo opportunity, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, a shiny structure that often falls apart in a few years. The intent was to restore, but the result was erasure. 3. One-size-fits-none solutions. A charity launches a solar light project for remote villages, but they don't ask if people want solar lights. They don't train anyone to maintain them. They don't check if replacement parts are available. A year later, most of the lights are broken. People are back to using candles, and yet the annual report says 2,000 households served. Impact measured in units delivered, not lives changed. 4. Cultural disrespect masquerading as help. Mission trips, short-term volunteers, people with no background in education or medicine teaching in schools and clinics. They take photos, they leave gifts, they feel fulfilled. But what about the communities? They're often treated as passive recipients, talked over, talked about, but rarely talked with. Local knowledge is ignored. Traditions are overwritten, and what was meant to uplift becomes a reenactment of colonial dynamics. 5. Creating trauma, not healing. In efforts to tell powerful stories, some charities parade victims of war, disease, or poverty in front of donors. Photos of crying children, graphic footage of disaster, endless retelling of pain without context, consent, or follow-up care. These aren't stories, they're spectacles, and they turn human beings into emotional bait, all for a donation click. So what's the lesson? Good hearts are not enough. Without humility, cultural competence, and accountability, charity can become colonialism with better branding. Real help requires more than giving. It requires asking, what do they need? Who's already doing the work here? How do we support, not replace? Will this still serve them long after we're gone? Because the road to hell isn't just paved with bad intentions. It's paved with good ones, backed by money, media, and ego. So the next time someone says, at least they tried, ask, did they listen first? Did they stay long enough to see the results? Or did they leave the community worse and call it progress? Because in charity, the road to harm is often labeled hope.
Reimagining generosity, what the future of giving could be. Now that we've stripped away the illusion, now that we've seen how charity has been used to protect power, manipulate perception, and sustain inequality, the question is not, should we give? The real question is, how do we give differently? Because generosity isn't the problem. The system around it is. So what if we reimagined generosity from the ground up? Not as a performance, not as a tax strategy,
not as a public redemption arc, but as a practice of shared humanity, rooted in justice, humility, and true solidarity. 1. From saving to standing with. Let's stop trying to be saviors. Let's become allies, listeners, and partners. Instead of asking, how can I help them? We ask, how can I support what they're already building? True generosity means relinquishing control and trusting that people are not broken. They are often just disempowered by systems we benefit from. 2. From giving to redistributing. Generosity is not just about giving what's extra. It's about questioning why you have extra in the first place. We must move from charity to economic justice. That means paying reparations, supporting wealth transfer, funding community land ownership, canceling debt, not just easing its burden. Because some things aren't solved with a gift, they're solved by returning what was taken. 3. From institutions to communities. Rather than funneling millions into massive foundations with overhead, what if we funded mutual aid groups, co-ops, and community-led projects? These aren't shiny. They're not always efficient, but they are embedded in the lived realities of the people they serve. They don't build empires, they build resilience. And they know that power is not in the size of the grant, but in who controls the decision-making. 4. From metrics to meaning. Let's stop measuring charity in numbers alone. Let's ask harder questions. Did this give people more choices? Did it shift power? Did it create dignity or dependence? Will it outlive the donor? Because real impact isn't always quantifiable. Sometimes it looks like a mother with land in her name, a child who speaks their native tongue with pride, a village that doesn't need outside help anymore. 5. From silence to accountability. If you're a donor, a nonprofit, or just someone who wants to help, invite critique. Be transparent. Be willing to say, we got it wrong. Because humility is not weakness. It's the foundation of ethical generosity. And if you've been harmed by bad charity, your voice matters. Your experience isn't an inconvenience. It's a compass pointing toward a better way. Reimagining generosity is not about perfection. It's about intention. It's about unlearning what we were taught, that the rich must save the poor, that impact must be measured in headlines, that charity makes you good. No, justice makes you good. Equity makes you good. Listening makes you good. The future of giving is not about giving more. It's about giving up the myth of the hero and stepping into a world where everyone is a collaborator, not a savior, not a symbol, not a spectator. So let's build that world, not with slogans, not with selfies, but with courage, accountability, and love that doesn't need to be seen to be real. Because in the end, the truest form of generosity is not the gift itself. It's the world you choose to create with it.